Welcome everyone. My name's JB and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at NetCom Learning. As a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions, we're very excited to host today's executive webinar on the Strategic Cube method. Presenting today's topic is Vincent Suppa. Vincent teaches graduate business courses at New York University, is an efficiency hacker and a certified executive Six Sigma black belt. He specializes in working with pre-IPO startups, helping them to position themselves for public offering, acquisition, or merger. Vincent also worked in Asia as an expat, as well as in the US high-tech industry and European telecommunications sector. Self-described as a part of the Generation Flux, he is the founding president of HR Avant-Garde. Please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic, and we do offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored towards your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you could absolutely make an appointment with us and speak with one of our learning consultants on our website, netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded. You will get free access to this recording within the next 24 hours via email. Now, before we get started, I would just like to give you a quick overview of the logistics. To start with, you have the option to adjust the window size to your liking. You can simply hit the escape key and find the zoom button on the top left corner of your GoToWebinar viewer, which is right over here. Everyone has been muted as well except for our presenters today. Please feel free to submit any questions you may have for the presenter here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of this session. A PDF of today's slides are also in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. I would also like to share an exciting raffle that we have today. NetCom Learning CEO Russell Sarter has recently launched a new book called Building an Innovative Learning Organization. Russell is known as one of the top thought leaders in the training industry, and we're giving away a free copy of this book at the end of the webinar. To read a free chapter, you can also check out our chat box today for the link. After the presentation, I will announce who the lucky winner is, so please stay tuned. Now, without further ado, I will pass it on over to Vincent to present today's topic.
Hello everyone and welcome. I'm very happy to be here and thank you for joining me. The Strategy Cube method in 18 minutes. So for today's agenda, we're going to learn a comprehensive and efficient method to qualify the most essential elements of your company's strategy. This method is used for leading your company's quarterly review sessions and can also be used to measure any possible strategic drift, meaning when your company's execution is drifting further away from its original mission statement. The method I'm about to present has also been used for researching for job interviews, positioning startup companies, analyzing the competition, and of course, as mentioned, for strategic overhauls. Now, all of my methodologies focus on minimizing three tax categories. The one that we're most familiar with is money. We want to decrease the amount of budget required for any business initiative. But I also recognize that there's a tax on time and a tax on broadband. Broadband referring to complexity. For example, if you're folding your laundry, it might take 2 hours, but you could also be on a business call because folding your laundry has low broadband, meaning low complexity. So any initiative we introduce, we always want to be mindful that we need to minimize its tax on time, broadband, and of course money. Now, if I had to teach strategy in one single slide, this would be it. So for today's webinar, we're going to discuss 6 dimensions of strategy. Also, we're going to talk about how we could use this dimensional approach to strategy as a contrarian approach to interview preparation. Now, those 6 dimensions of strategy that we saw in the previous cube, don't worry, we will go through them one by one. But to use this approach to prepare for job interviews is a contrarian approach, and let's benchmark it against the conventional wisdom. When going for a job interview, the conventional wisdom is to read everything you can get your hands on about the company. And essentially, that would mean we would be regurgitating what the interviewer already knows about her own company. And again, we would be spending a disproportionate amount of time, right, which is our scarcest resource, reading everything we could about the company, whether or not we actually received an offer. So the return on investment may not be there. And be mindful that most recruiters treat their time as a scarce, limited resource and will not necessarily read everything they can get their hands on about their clients. Why? Because everyone has 24 hours in a day. Rich, poor, in between, that is the one great common denominator. And also, if you take this approach to prepare for a job interview, it's a long time to market. It might take you 6 to 8 hours of reading. Now let's talk about this contrarian approach. If you use the cube method to qualify where your targeted company stands across all 6 dimensions, you could ask the interviewer interesting questions based on your analysis, and then you could tell the interviewer something interesting about her own company that she may not have considered before. And of course, as we will see, this approach has a very quick time to market, and it certainly takes far less time than reading everything you can get your hands on about the company. Now, here are the 6 dimensions that we saw in the previous slide. We're going to talk about cost leadership versus product differentiation, the degree of vertical integration, the degree of horizontal integration, leveraging the brand versus selling the brand, retail versus business to business, and retrenchment versus growth. Every company, every startup has a position on all 6 of these dimensions. We're not inventing these dimensions. We're merely discovering them, because whether or not a company acknowledges what their degree of vertical integration is, they still occupy a degree of vertical integration, whether or not they realize it or not. Let's get started. Cost leadership versus product differentiation. Let's look at the extremes so we could really illustrate the point. At the extremes, there are 2 ways to make $1 million. We could sell one widget with a $1 million margin. This would be product differentiation, plenty of bells and whistles. Or conversely, we could sell 1 million widgets at a $1 margin. This is cost leadership. Product differentiation is about buy from us, we're the best, we're worth the extra money. Cost leadership is buy from us, we offer the best value. So every company exists somewhere along that continuum, whether they lean towards product differentiation or cost leadership. Now, where do we find these indicators of cost leadership versus product differentiation? Well, at a fundamental level, we go to the income statement, and we divide the bottom line by the top line. That might be an easy way to remember. You simply take net income and you divide it by revenue. You could either compare yourself to your competitors, or if you have a product differentiation strategy and you benchmark your margins over time for each subsequent quarter, you may realize that your margins are eroding, and without realizing it, you're drifting towards a cost leadership strategy. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but if your mission statement, if your strategic objective is to be a product differentiator, then clearly this would be an example of strategic drift. There's also the sofa bed strategy. It's a phrase that describes a sofa bed being neither a comfortable bed or a comfortable sofa. And that would be a company that occupies neither a product differentiation position or a cost leadership position, but is somewhere in the middle. These companies do exist, but the wisdom is that it's much harder for them to really stand out with consumers because, again, a sofa bed is neither a comfortable bed or a comfortable sofa. Let's talk about the degree of vertical integration. Vertical integration is really about increasing the number of vendors that you introduce in your value chain. It's about expanding businesses into processes at different points of the value chain. Now, as an extreme example, let's look at the Ford Motor Company in the 1940s. They owned their own rubber plantations in Malaysia to produce their own rubber, to make their own tires for their own automobiles. That represents an extremely high degree of vertical integration. If they were, for example, to grow their own food for the company cafeteria, again, that is an extremely high form of vertical integration. Now, many companies occupy lower positions on vertical integration. If you look at a marquee company like Dell, well, Dell's competitive advantage is subassembly, supply chain management, and getting the product to the customer on time. But they do not make their own disk drives, their own processors, their own screens, their own cases for their notebook computers. They basically have their vendors make those products for them, and they put it together. So that would be an example of low vertical integration. Let's look at a classic model of vertical integration. 1619 Broadway. This used to be in the heart of New York City's Music District. This is the Brill Building, and at its peak, the Brill Building contained 165 music businesses all in this one building. So let's look at a classic New York City example of high vertical integration. Someone could write a song and then within the same building see publishers until they sold it. They go to another floor and they get an arrangement written. Then they get copies at the duplication office on another floor. Still in that same building, they could book studio time at a demo studio. They could hire musicians and singers on another floor and then actually cut the demo. When they have the demo of their song, they could take it around the building because that building also houses record companies, publishers, artist managers, and even artists themselves. And then after they found an artist to record the song, they could see radio promoters, again, in the same building to produce the record. So this is a very real New York City example illustrating a very high degree of vertical integration. Now let's talk about backwards versus forward integration. Simply put, backwards integration is when processes expand backwards towards the beginning of your supply chain, towards the end of the value chain that really deals with the raw materials. So if we have a restaurant and instead of buying our chickens from a vendor, we decide to have our own farm where we raise our own chickens, well, we've introduced another business process, and because we're going back towards the raw material, this is an example of backwards vertical integration. Forward integration is when processes expand forward towards contact with the customer. I am a farmer, and instead of selling my produce to a wholesaler, I sell my produce directly on the side of the road, directly to customers. Again, I've introduced another process in my business, but because I introduced a process that's more towards contact with the customer, this is an example of forward integration. Every company has to make a decision, whether they realize it or not, whether by default or not, where they fit in terms of what degree of vertical integration do they want to have. And then if they decide to adjust that degree of vertical integration, do they want to adjust it forward or backwards? Now, vertical integration is about the cost, and it is reflected in the income statement. We could either look at COGS, cost of goods sold, or SG&A cost. So that is a way to measure quantitatively the impact of vertical integration. Let's talk about horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is not the opposite of vertical integration. It is a distinct continuum on our strategic cube. So let's look at an example. Horizontal integration is about economy of scales or economy of scope. Let's say that we are a company and we give mortgage applications. We lend monies to consumers so they could purchase homes. And we do this in the United States. Well, we decide to introduce another product or service in the same market. So not only are we going to continue to sell mortgages, but we are also going to give out car loans. So this is an example where we have increased the number of products in the same market. That's an example of horizontal integration. Now, another example of horizontal integration is that we give mortgages and we only want to stay in the mortgage business. We do that in the United States, but now we want to provide the same product to Canada. This is also an example of horizontal integration. The first example is introducing introducing more products or services to the same market. And the second example is the same product or service, but to more markets. Both of those are illustrations. So a quick review, when we produce more product lines to the same market, that is deep horizontal integration, and producing more of the same product lines to more markets, like in the United States and Canada, that's broad horizontal integration. The reality is that usually companies provide a combination of both. Now, we have a great technique to develop new products and services. Look at what a company does and then ask the question of your staff, well, what do we really do? So Charles Schwab, for example, could say we provide, we have 40% of the brokerage account markets in America. But they could define their business more broadly and say, well, actually, it's true, we have 40% of the brokerage account market, but we also handle 1% of the wealth in America. Just by defining their business more broadly, they're able to come up with products and services that they might not have thought of if they simply defined their business in a more narrow traditional way. Netflix, one might say it's a place where you could rent movies, or we could define Netflix more broadly that it is an entertainment delivery system. Once you see Netflix as an entertainment delivery system, all sorts of products and services beyond movie content come to mind. So this is a very quick time to market way to have a somewhat structured meeting with your marketing people to see how can we expand horizontal integration. So again, the 3 steps are: state the traditional way your company defines its business. 2, how would that company define its business more broadly? And then 3, after defining your company's business in a more broad, less traditional way, what new products or services might come to mind that can be developed from this new strategic mindset. Now, we discussed how vertical integration is about the cost, while horizontal integration is about the revenue. And remember, net income equals revenue minus cost. So both vertical and horizontal integration is about maximizing net income. Horizontal integration is reflected in the income statement under top line revenue. Our next and 4th continuum on our strategic cube is leveraging the brand versus selling the brand. This is about exclusivity versus accessibility. Let's look at the extremes again to find the object lesson. If we only have one channel of distribution versus multiple channels of distribution, we might be leveraging versus selling the brand. Leveraging the brand is about maintaining that luxury goods part of the market, and selling the brand means that we have made our product more accessible at more distribution channels, and we are approaching, we're not a commodity per se, but we are approaching that end of the continuum. So luxury goods, generally speaking, have high margins, and then if we're selling the brand, generally speaking, we have lower margins. Now, people might say intuitively, well, why would anyone want to sell the brand? Well, think about it. Why would a firm want to sell its brand and decrease its margins? Well, who wants to be a luxury brand if you can make luxury profits by decreasing exclusivity? That's why companies do it. They're for-profit organizations. When you sell the brand, you decrease the price point, you provide more channels of distribution that's more accessible, demand will increase, and what usually happens is that your margins decrease. But if revenue increases as a percentage more than margins decrease as a percentage, well then net income will increase. And that's why companies may decide to shift from leveraging to selling the brand. But again, companies must make a strategic decision on where they want to be in terms of this continuum. Our next dimension is retail versus business to business. And often companies are both into the retail and the B2B, but again, this is a strategic continuum that companies have to decide. Now, business to consumer, generally speaking, because there are plenty of exceptions, but generally speaking, it's emotional and impulse purchase, often has an immediate need. When you buy something from a consumer store, usually accounts receivable is 0, you pay the money right away to the cashier. Many times it's often with no prior relationship. And in retail, it's usually about less quantity but higher margins. Now, in business to business, if a company is purchasing a new ERP system, the decision is very analytical, it's planned, the purchase is usually invoiced, net 30, net 60, net 90, and it is seldom a one-off. Usually there was a nurturing sales team that courted the company for 6 months, sometimes to a year, depending on the expense of the purchase. And again, generally speaking, wholesale deals with greater quantity, not less, but with smaller margins. Now, I just want to give us a quick review into leading versus lagging indicators to introduce is to knock down the bowling pins. But the leading indicator might be to get that bowling ball in the center arrow, perhaps a couple of meters into the lane. So indicator, we try to aim that bowling ball in the center arrow because that's the leading indicator, and that increases the probability that it will in fact knock all of the pins. So just a quick review of a leading versus lagging indicator. Our final dimension is retrenchment versus growth. Is a company growing or retrenching? Well, how could we determine it? Well, look at, as a leading indicator, look at R&D expenditures as a percentage of revenue, and often that could be found on the income statement. Another leading indicator can be found in the cash flow statement. A cash flow statement representing the quote-unquote corporate checkbook, okay, of the company. The cash flow statement has 3 categories. It has cash coming in and out under operating activities, under investment activities, and finally under financing activities. If we see a company having cash come in under the investment category, that means they are selling off assets, and more than likely they are in retrenchment mode. If you see cash leaving the cash flow statement under the investment category, that company is positioning itself for growth, and this is a leading indicator. So when you're interviewing for a job, you want to be interested, is this company poised for growth? So one of the first things that I tell my clients to do is to look at the cash flow statement. Are they still investing in the company? Now, a couple of lagging indicators for retrenchment versus growth. You could look at margins over time, net income, and revenue over time as well. But again, these are lagging indicators. Once the quarter closes, it's done. A quick bonus tip for our job interviewers: when you are interviewing for a job, you want to avoid a job that is high risk, low visibility, meaning that if you do it correctly, no one knows who you are, but if you do it wrong, suddenly become infamous. That might be an example. Sometimes people don't appreciate security guards because if everything goes well, or if you're running payroll and you don't make any mistakes, it's high risk, low visibility, because if you do it correctly, no one really congratulates you for running 26 consecutive payrolls without fail. But if you get it wrong one time for 1 or 2 people, suddenly everyone knows your name. So you want to make sure that the position you're interviewing for has at least high risk, high visibility. So you want to really be mindful of this paradigm. Our 9 sequitur of the day: you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are. If you would like to learn more, please join me at HR Avantgarde. That's hravg.com. And I hope you join us for our next webinar. This is my first demand-driven webinar. I received quite a few emails asking if I could produce a webinar on financial literacy in 18 minutes. They speak French in France, Italian in Italy. Well, in business, we speak finance. So I hope you join us on March 31st. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for another great presentation. Before we get to some questions today, I would like to announce who the lucky winner is for the free copy of Russell Sartor's new book, Building an Innovative Learning Organization, and it is Lillian Johnstone. Lillian Johnstone. So congratulations, Lillian. I will email you shortly with the details. We will be shipping you a free copy of this book. So I hope you enjoy it. Now, a few questions that we have here, Vincent, is that how often should I have these strategy review sessions?
Well, I recommend that companies do them at least every quarter for a more established company. And keep in mind, if you're doing them every quarter, you're not reinventing the wheel each time. You're just making sure that you're avoiding strategic drift. For startup companies or pre-IPO companies, of course, it should be much more often. For a startup with an angel investor, maybe every month or perhaps twice a month because things are more in flux with this startup company. So in conclusion, for an established company, a minimum of 4 times a year. For a startup company, pre-IPO startup, perhaps at least once a month.
Perfect. Thank you so much. What if I want to drill down on this topic? What can I do?
Well, of course, I think as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the objective of these webinars is to give viewers a very high-level meta view of a topic. So, of course, we have workshops where we take these topics and we drill them down. These workshops could be anywhere from 1 day to a couple of days, and of course, they operationalize the entire lecture. So that would be a case of just making an inquiry of a workshop on a given topic of interest that perhaps you were exposed to during one of our webinars.
Absolutely. So if any of you guys are interested in a further discussion, like I mentioned earlier, you can absolutely just call and contact one of our learning consultants. Then we can discuss that further. I think that's all that we have for today. Thank you so much, Vincent, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you found this presentation informative. If there are any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com. Again, thank you, Vincent, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.